everyone, thank you so much for coming today to the Cambridge Society for Economic Pluralism. Today we're joined with Professor Ha-Joon Chang, who is a distinguished research professor of economics at SOAS University of London. Previously, he was at the Faculty of Economics at the University of Cambridge. He has published many books, including The Political Economy of Industrial Policy, Kicking Away the Ladder, Bad Samaritans, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, and Economics: The User's Guide. His writings have been translated and published in 45 languages and 46 countries and have sold over 2 million copies worldwide. He's also advised numerous international organizations and national governments, and is currently the member of the Committee for Development Policy, the highest advisory board of the United Nations for Development Issues. Today we're joined by him as he talks about his latest book, Edible Economics, A Hungry Economist Explains the World, which discusses the need for economic pluralism and the need for economic literacy. Professor Chang, it is an honor to have you here and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. There are two of my greatest passions, economics and food. I left my South Korea and moved to Britain in 1986 to study economics as a graduate student in Cambridge. When I first arrived, my English was poor, racial and cultural prejudices were rampant, and the weather was rubbish. But the worst thing was the food. Before coming to Britain, I hadn't realized that food could taste so bad, Everything was so bland and overcooked, and there was no sauce, and garlic was the nation's enemy number one, as that you will find out if you read this book. The garlic features in the foundation myth of food scene in Britain is completely different today. You can get anything. The other day I was passing some food court in central London, and there were these guys selling Uzbek dumplings. Someone told me that there's a fusion restaurant in Birmingham serving a fusion of Korean and Peruvian food. No, which is the ultimate the fusion food, because the Peruvian food itself is a great fusion. Yeah? So on the Inca route, the Iberian trunk, if you like, and then later the Japanese and Chinese the flowers. In the late 19th, early 20th century, millions of the poor Asians were shipped to various parts of the world as indentured laborers. So these are essentially slaves with a fixed term. So after 10 years or whatever, they become free, but while they are working under this indenture, they are basically slaves. Yeah? And a lot of the Japanese and the Chinese went to Peru, and today you look at Peruvian food, is got very, very strong Chinese and Japanese influence. So mix that with Korean, just unbelievable. Yeah? My theory is that sometime in the late 1990s, the British people had this collective epiphany that their food sucks. No, but this was a great thing. Once they did that, they became totally open-minded. Yeah? Once you admit that your own food is bad, then why should you prefer Mexican over Korean or prefer Turkish over Indian? Yeah? Anything tastes is fine. Yeah? So as a result, this country has become arguably the most diverse and interesting country to eat in. Yeah? Unfortunately, my other world was moving in the opposite direction. Economics until the 1970s was populated by several different schools. Hang on. Oh yeah, this is the American cover. And this is the British cover. Yeah? Yeah, American covers are always more kind of the crowded, more fun, but yeah. I personally prefer this cover. But anyway, as I explained in my previous book, Economics: The User's Guide, there are at least 9 different schools of economics, and easily 20 if you counted these smaller ones, and split some of the bigger ones into sub-schools. So Keynesian can be split into Keynesian and post-Keynesian, Schumpeterian into Schumpeterian, neo-Schumpeterian, institutionalist, old and new, and so on. And until the 70s, I mean, these different schools were coexisting and interacted with each other. Sometimes it was, I don't know, a death match. I mean, in the 1920s and 30s, the Marxists and the Austrians had this debate called the calculation debate, in which they were discussing whether it is actually possible to centrally plan a complex economy. In the 60s and 70s, there was a famous Cambridge debate. So on one side were economists from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard and MIT, neoclassical economists, and on the other side was economists from Cambridge, England, Keynesians, and neo-Ricardians who had this debate called the capital theory debate. I mean, a very esoteric debate, but a very important debate theoretically. So sometimes there were these death matches, but at other times the debates were more cordial. They learned from each other, stole from each other, very often not acknowledging it. And economics was better for it. It was a bit like today's British food scene. All these different traditions, being proud of themselves, but competing with each other, learning from each other, stealing from each other, sometimes getting fused. Post-Keynesian theory is basically Keynes plus Marx, I mean, to simplify a bit. So there were even these fusion theories. Unfortunately, since the 80s, economics has become like British food scene before the 90s. There's only one thing on the offer on the menu, and it is not very exciting. And I'm not saying that neoclassical economics is particularly bad. Like all other schools of economics, it has its strengths and weaknesses, because all these different theories were developed to look at different things. For example, classical economists were very much interested in production and division of surplus from the production process rather than the market exchange itself. Neoclassical economics is interested in market. They all have different assumptions about human nature. The Austrian school and the neoclassical school may both advocate the free market approach. Here, I mean, many of you already know this, but you have to realize that not all neoclassical economies are free market economies, because there's this theory of market failure. But insofar as that it advocates that free market, it is sometimes conflated with the Austrian economics. So many neoclassical economists that show pictures of Friedrich von Hayek and say, wow, this is a great guy, but he has a completely different theory about the human being. So neoclassical, that human beings are selfish, rational agents. For Hayek, the individuals have limited rationality, and that's exactly why we need the free market, because you cannot plan these things because you don't know enough. The world is complex, uncertain. So his theory is that the rational behavior is only possible because we take a lot of things for granted. We just unquestioningly accept certain things. So he once famously said that between instinct and reason are customs and traditions. So his view is that unless you accept a lot of things that without questioning, our ability to do rational thinking is limited. This is a view which is almost identical to that of Herbert Simon, who is the founder of the behavioralist school. Anyway, so all these schools have different theories of an individual, different theories on how the economy changes or doesn't change. Yeah? I mean, they have different political and ethical assumptions. So they are good at some things and very bad at other things. Yeah? Now, the trouble is that once one school dominates, then the limitations of that school becomes the limitations of the whole subject. Hmm? So, yeah, I mean, I don't need to repeat many of these things, but just to pick on a couple of things, neoclassical economics regards self-seeking as the most important, if not the only, aspect of human nature. And those who behave in a non-selfish way are dismissed as suckers, as the Americans say, or suspected of having a selfish ulterior motive. Yeah? Now, that, okay, is a theory. I mean, that in itself, there's nothing wrong with it, but the problem is that once that view of human nature begins to dominate, then it actually changes society. Huh? Because if enough people begin to believe that people are selfish, then you have to believe that, yeah? In order to just defend your interests. Yeah? So it has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and this has made our society less open to cooperation, and has created all kinds of problems. Yeah? For another example, neoclassical economics starts its analysis after taking the existing distribution of income, wealth, and power as given, so it is inherently bad at challenging the status quo, the very idea of Pareto improvement. Yeah? Now, this is a very important ethical principle that tries to defend individuals from the tyranny of the majority. Huh? Because what Pareto says is you cannot call a social change an improvement unless it doesn't harm anyone while making some people better off. Huh? No, this is very important because that people casually think, it's just one guy. Why don't we sacrifice him? Yeah? For the 7 billion people, yeah? Maybe, but then where do you stop? Yeah? Why not 6 million Jews? Yeah? Why not 50 million South Koreans? Yeah? Yeah. So this is a very, very important ethical principle, but it doesn't mean that you can apply it everywhere, because my view is that like all ethical principles, taken to the extreme, it becomes a monster. Yeah, so there are some countries where like one guy, one family controls just about everything. Yeah, and a lot of people will be okay with this family giving up some of his wealth to reduce poverty. Yeah? I mean, they invest more in education. Yeah? On the other hand, you cannot push that ethical principle to the other extreme, because then, before you know it, you are in the same bed with Hitler and Stalin. Yeah? So my view is that we need multiple ethical standards. Yeah? I mean, trying to use just one standard for everything, this principle that was basically developed to defend individuals against the tyranny of majority, if you are not careful, can become a doctrine that justifies extreme concentration of wealth and power. Huh? Anyway, so I mean, I can go on, but the point is that when you have just one theory applied to explain everything, then you begin to have a problem. Huh? Your intellectual diet becomes unbalanced and unhealthy. Huh? I mean, I can give similar kind of criticism for any of the other economic schools. Yeah? I mean, they all have problems. Yeah? So I've been engaged in, basically together with the students of CSEP and more broadly rethinking economics all over the world, engaged in a movement to make economics more pluralistic, yeah? Because one theory cannot explain everything. Yeah? Let me give you a more concrete example, Singapore. Yeah? When you read about Singapore in standard economics books or in the financial press, you will only hear about this free trade policy and its welcoming attitude towards foreign investors, which it has. But you will never be told that 90% of land in Singapore is owned by the government. 85% of housing is provided by government-owned housing corporation, and a staggering 22% of GDP is produced by state-owned enterprises. Yeah? Yeah, so when Boris Johnson and these people were in selling Brexit, saying that we want to become Thames of, Singapore on Thames, I was laughing, So, do they want to nationalize 90% of the land? Yeah? Do you want to renationalize all these water companies and rail companies and so on? They don't know what they are talking about. Yeah? So I challenged my graduate student, one of whom is sitting there, that look, give me one economic theory that can single-handedly explain Singapore. There's no such theory. Because it's a very pragmatic mixture of extreme free market theory and Marxist theory. So anyway, I've been campaigning for economic pluralism, but also at the same time I've been campaigning for what I call mass economic literacy. Yeah? Because in a capitalist society, especially in the current phase in which the market is supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of all the social decisions, democracy is meaningless unless everyone knows some economics. Yeah? Just think about it. I mean, these days, everything has to justify its existence in economic terms, whether it's the teaching of ancient languages in universities or preservation of cultural heritage. I even met some British people who try to defend the monarchy by arguing that it brings in tourist revenue. I'm not a monarchist, I'm actually an anti-monarchist, but what a demeaning, ridiculous way of defending an institution that is supposed to be, well, at least according to your worldview, at the foundation of your society. It's come to that. So in that kind of society, if people don't know economics, they don't know what they are voting for. Yeah? I still remember in the 2000 American election, there were a lot of people in America voting for George W. Bush, saying things like, oh, he looks like a kind of guy that I could have a beer with. Yeah? On that qualification, I could have become the president of the United States of America. Yeah? I could have beer with anyone. Yeah? Yeah, so this book is an attempt to draw readers who normally find economics dry or intimidating, boring, by bribing them with food stories. Yeah? So, each chapter starts with food item. It's titled after the food item. And it starts with some story about that food item, lime, chocolate, chili, prawn, garlic, acorn. Probably you didn't know that you can eat acorn, but we eat a lot of acorn in Korea. Yeah? And the story of the food could be anything. I mean, it could be its biological characteristics, could be about its origin and its spreading, could be about its role in some important historical event or particular cultures, or sometimes by personal relationships with these items. Yeah? I mean, in the chocolate, I confess that I'm addicted to the stuff. Yeah? And then I somehow morph it into an economic story using what I call the Simpsons approach to writing. Yeah? So what it is that if you watch that Simpsons episode, it almost always starts with this short story, the short clip, maybe half a minute, maybe 1 minute, usually featuring Bart Simpson, something very silly usually. Yeah? And then that story sometimes is crucial for the main story, but that's very often it's got nothing to do with the main story. Yeah? So this the food stories, my food stories are like that. Yeah? So I have a chapter that starts with the Uruguayan chapter called Beef that starts with the Uruguayan football player Luis Suarez, who unfortunately is famous for biting other players. Yeah? No, he's a great player, but this bizarre habit, yeah, just completely overshadows his football skills. Yeah, everyone remembers him as this guy with the teeth sticking out who bites other people. Yeah. Anyway, the beef chapter starts with it, and then somehow that becomes beef. And then somehow that becomes a discussion on the problem of the international trading system today. Yeah? The line chapter starts with scurvy, and then ends up with a discussion of the economics of climate change. The chicken chapter starts with in-flight meal on the Aeroflot, the currently Russian but formerly Soviet airline in its Soviet days. And ends with the discussion on the inequality. The carrot chapter starts with carrot cake and then ends with the pattern system. So it's basically traveling down the rabbit hole, so to speak. Yeah, I mean but yeah, I mean it's fun. I can guarantee that. And yeah, I mean, the great thing about my food stories is that they are a bit like the bribe that your mother might have offered to you in order to make you eat your greens. Yeah, so if you eat your greens, I'll give you ice cream. Yeah, but my bribery is better, because bribery comes first. Yeah? So you can eat the ice cream and don't have to eat the greens if you don't like it. Yeah? But the hope is that the story is interesting enough that you keep reading, and then before you know it, by mistake, you are reading about economics. Yeah? Okay, so how much time do I have? -10, I think. Yeah? Okay, let me just talk about just one of the chapters. Before coming to Britain, there were these vegetables that I had never tasted, but whose existence I knew about because I read them in the books. Yeah, so well, the current government's favorite vegetable, turnip, yeah? Britain's answer to tomatoes, yeah? I mean, the Teresa Coffee that tried to argue that tomato and cucumber shortages are no problem because you can all eat turnips, yeah? Anyway, so turnips, broccoli, cauliflower, in my childhood Korea, there were no such vegetables, but I knew about them. But there was one vegetable which I found upon my arrival here that I had never even heard of. It was this thing called okra. Now, I came across okra first in Indian restaurant. I say Indian because 80% of Indian restaurants in this country are run by Bangladeshis. Yeah? So that should say it's South Asian. Yeah? Anyway, I ate this dish called bindi bhaji, which is translated as salted lady fingers. And yeah, I mean, the idea was a bit, the icky, you eat the fingers. But yeah, I wasn't too impressed by it at the beginning because, yeah, it was not well cooked, so it became too slimy. Its scientific term is mucilaginous. But anyway, I mean, it's got this gooey, the slimy feel, which actually I like, but that first encounter was a bit too much because it wasn't well cooked. But later I got to like it, and then through my travels for work and sometimes holiday, I came across other interesting dishes using okra. So this is a Brazilian dish called frango com quiabo, literally meaning chicken with okra. And this is the famous American gumbo, which actually is the a word for okra for some African languages. Now, okra, not the case of India, but in Brazil and the United States because of slavery. I mean, this was brought over from Africa by the enslaved Africans. So there's the slavery in Brazil, there's slavery in the United States. I mean, we all know about slavery, but I mean, few of us actually know how important it was for the United States. In the 19th century, these two slave crops, cotton and tobacco, accounted for anything between 25 and 65% of the total American export revenue. This means that without the slaves, they could not have developed the economies even half as quickly as they did, because as a economically backward country, which the U.S. was at the time, you need to generate export revenue in order to be able to import the advanced machines, advanced technologies. So without international trade, there is no economic development, if you are a developing country. And these crops were supplying the bulk of U.S. export revenue. In the 1830s, cotton alone accounted for 58% of U.S. export revenue. So without the slaves, this country could not have developed. The slaves didn't just provide the free labor, well, free for the slave masters, unfree for the slaves. Free labor, they also were a very important source of capital. At the time in the U.S., the land was very cheap. Because if you're willing to push out the Native Americans, the land was there. So land had really very little economic value. So a lot of bank loans were actually extended using slaves as collateral. And doing research for this book, I learned that these slave-based mortgage loans were packaged into what we these days call asset-backed securities. I mean, those things that were at the source of 2008 financial crisis. In the same way that we are now packaging student loans and the house mortgages, car loans, and so on into the marketable bonds. I mean, they're already doing it. And they sold these bonds to foreign investors, especially British investors. So these people provided not just labor, but also a huge amount of capital. But even more interesting is the fact that the United States could not have become the global superpower that it is today without enslaved Americans, although these were not the enslaved Africans in the U.S. These were enslaved Africans who lived in this French colony called Saint-Domingue. So this was a very, very important French colony. You know? This Saint-Domingue at one point was the biggest producer of coffee in the world. At one point it was the biggest producer of sugar in the world. You know? But the slaves in Saint-Domingue revolted against the French 1791, you know? And amazingly expelled the French and acquired independence to become the Republic of Haiti, yeah? In 1804. They did it under the leadership of this brilliant military leader called Toussaint Louverture, who unfortunately was captured by the French in 1802, died in captivity in France in 1803, but Haiti became independent in 1804, and then it became the first ever nation to ban officially slavery. Huh? Now, this Haitian Revolution, however, brought about a big kind of geopolitical change because Napoleon, the then ruler of France, got fed up with this the colony. Huh? Not just, sorry. Oh, no, give me 5. I mean, I need more stories to tell. Yeah. I have more stories to tell, yeah. And Napoleon not only got fed up with Haiti, but the whole of French position in North America, this was called Louisiana, and it occupied the middle third of North America. Now, at the time, the Americans were already negotiating to buy the port of New Orleans and a bit of hinterland. So that in 1703, Thomas Jefferson, the president, sent the state secretary, James Monroe, later president, to Paris to negotiate this purchase. Yeah? And when Monroe got there, Napoleon said, "Do you want the whole lot?" Yeah? And Monroe said, "What do you mean? We are exiting North America. Yeah? Take the whole lot." Yeah? Well, I mean, he didn't have a telephone, email, WhatsApp. Yeah? So he apparently got hold himself up into the residence of then U.S. ambassador to France. They decided to buy it, came back with the whole land, yeah? And apparently Jefferson flew into rage. Yeah? "You idiot, I told you to buy the port. Why did you buy the whole useless land?" Yeah? Because at the time it was useless. Yeah? This is known as Louisiana Purchase. Yeah? I mean, the purchase is one of the biggest overstatements in history because the French really didn't own their land, yeah, in any meaningful sense. Yeah? I mean, they had a few garrisons. Yeah? So what the Americans bought from the French is not Louisiana, but the right to expel the Native Americans out of Louisiana. Yeah? So it's not Louisiana Purchase. Yeah? Anyway, so this land was initially useless, but it gave the springboard for the U.S. To become a continental-sized country because they took that northwestern part through the Oregon Purchase. They bought it from the British, and the southwestern part they forcibly took from Mexico after the U.S.-Mexico War. I mean, they paid, but the total knockdown price, they took 1/3 of Mexican territory, and yeah, they reached the Pacific, and then later they found that that middle bit is really fertile. Huh? They became the breadbasket of the United States and subsequently the world. Yeah? I mean, some of the older readers might have seen this at the House on the Prairie. Huh? is about these the pioneer families. Yeah, of course this meant help for the Native Americans, but this part became the breadbasket of the U.S. And this put this man in quandary. Otto von Bismarck, the first Chancellor of United Germany. Bismarck was ruling in coalition with the Prussian landlords, the so-called Junkers, and the liberals. But when the American grains started pouring in, he had to do something for the Junkers because they were his political bedrock. So he came up with this the new coalition, which is sometimes known as the marriage of iron and rye, in which he offered protection for the Junkers, whose main crop was the rye, in return for them supporting the industrial capitalists that were emerging in Rhineland, guys producing iron, steel, chemicals, machines, and he ditched the liberals. And this was critical the impetus to German industrialization, and the event is kind of consecrated in the German historiography as the marriage of iron and rye. But that is not the only thing he did, because Bismarck is someone who invented the welfare state. People think the welfare state is a left-wing idea. I mean, New Deal democracy in America, Labour Party in Britain, social democracy in Sweden. No, actually, it was the arch anti-socialist Otto von Bismarck who invented this. Bismarck was vehemently anti-socialist, so he had this series of laws that were called anti-socialist laws, which came just one step before closing down the German Social Democratic Party. But he was not stupid. He understood that, look, I hate socialism, but if you expose the workers to the kind of the risks that they face in life, old age, illness, industrial accident, these people will turn to socialism. So starting with industrial accident insurance, which was world's first ever public insurance for working people, he introduced the pensions and other welfare schemes. So, actually, I presented two chapters together, Okra and Rye, but you can see the whole arc going from Okra to the modern welfare state, and this chapter mainly makes you think. The Okra chapter mainly makes you think again about the meaning of freedom in economics, because freedom is everywhere, free market, free trade, Even the Amartya Sen, who is critical of free market, he says that development should be seen as freedom, But the relationship between freedom and capitalism is very complicated and sometimes contradictory, So in the 19th century, it was the southern slave owners who were in favor of free trade, At the same time, they were, kind of using the ultimate degree of unfreedom to enslave the Americans. When the General Pinochet staged the bloody coup in Chile in 1973, both Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek came out openly supporting Pinochet, because for them, the most important freedom is the freedom to use your property. And they thought Salvador Allende, using socialist policies, well, it wasn't actually that socialist, but anyway, by their standard socialist policies, were kind of restricting that freedom. So in order to restore that freedom, they were in favor of suppressing political freedom. So I'm not saying that there's one grand theory of freedom that everyone should subscribe to. It's a very complex thing, but we are just kind of enamored by this idea of freedom, that anything that is free you think is good. But first of all, you have to think what kind of freedom are we talking about? Is it freedom of economic freedom or political freedom? If it's economic freedom, is it freedom to use property, freedom to form trade unions? And also you need to ask freedom for whom? The slave owners had free market, but it was based on freedom of enslaved Africans. And also the freedom from what? Free trade. I mean, does it mean that it's based on general freedom? No. I mean, in the 19th century, even before Britain started using free trade, after it became the industrial hegemon, the first countries that practiced free trade were Latin American countries. Not because they made a free choice to do that, but because they were forced to sign these treaties with European powers upon their independence between the 1810s and 30s, which deprived them of their right to set tariffs. And they were forced to have a low uniform rate of tariff for revenue purpose, like 3 to 5%. So free trade, freedom for traders, but not for the Latin American nation. So we need to ask all these questions. This is why it's so important to realize that economics is not a technical subject. I mean, there are, of course, very technical aspects, but underlying it are ethical and political assumptions. And this the story of Okra leading into that right. I mean, tell you how these things are interrelated, so complex, and how we should always question the ethical and political basis of any economic theory. Okay, let me finish there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really, really interesting presentation. Your book sounds really, really fascinating, and it's definitely one of the funniest economic books I've ever read. I'll start off with a couple questions myself,
Sure.
and then we'll open up the floor to the audience. So, one thing while reading your books I was wondering was that you talk very highly of kind of the Golden Age of Capitalism in the 1950s and 60s and the policies used then. Why did that change then happen to kind of this neoliberal era? Like, why do people vote for policies that Thatcher and Reagan had? Why was there so much? Like, why did economists even change their minds if they kind of saw that we needed, if the Golden Age of Capitalism was so good, why was there that change?
You said you had a couple of questions?
I'll ask after, or should I ask in a while?
Let's collect a few questions because sometimes they're related, so why don't you ask...
something else I was wondering was, you're kind of on the advisory boards of the UN, and a lot of these people you call the bad Samaritans. So how is your experience in those fields, and how do they kind of respect your opinion and treat you?
Thank you, Maybe one or two more from the floor?
If anyone has any questions, please put your hand up and I'll choose you. Not yet.
I cannot have been that convincing. Okay, yes, Golden Age of Capitalism. I mean, this is the period between roughly 1945 and 75. I mean, depending on who you read, it could be between 1950 and 80. I mean, during that period, the world experienced highest ever growth in per capita terms. at least in the rich countries, income inequality was very low, and there was financial stability. So the world economy as a whole grew at 3% during this period, 3% per year during this period. This is really high, because during the Industrial Revolution, the European countries that were going through Industrial Revolution grew at between 1 and 1.5%. And since the 1980s, in the era of neoliberalism, the world economy has grown, despite super growth of China, only at 1.5%. So the world economy never grew that fast. And then, at least in the rich countries, there was a very high degree of equality. A lot of countries that embraced the welfare state. In Europe, even many right-wing parties embraced the welfare state. I mean, German Christian Democrats. Even the Conservative Party. I mean, at least the so-called one nation wing of it. And there was hardly any financial crisis during the period. I mean, since the 80s, we had so many. I mean, you run out of fingers just to count the major ones. So I think it deserves to be called the Golden Age. But yes, I mean, the problem was that as this Golden Age proceeded, there was ultimately power struggle, because in the rich countries, they were experiencing labor shortage. Workers were becoming very aggressive, and they took a lot of gains through the aggressive wage bargaining, and then the capitalists wanted to hit back. Also, the developing countries during that period became very assertive, because the first, the independent developing countries were in Latin America, but because of the unequal treaties I talked about, until the 1870s and 80s, they were not really fully independent. I mean, when those treaties ran out, they became independent, but that was only one continent, and then also the part European. But between the 40s and the 70s, a series of developing nations in Asia and Africa became independent. And then they got organized into non-aligned movement. So we are not aligned to the US and the capitalist countries, but we are not aligned with the Soviet bloc either. We are trying to follow some middle way, and then they started demanding new international economic order. So despite decolonization, international economic order is still unequal. You need to do more. So the rich countries once again wanted to hit back. And then in the 70s and 80s came a series of events which made this counterattack possible, because in the 70s with the two oil shocks, you had inflation, and then it really kind of made it difficult for the workers to push further, because then it created this wage price spiral. So the employers the capitalists were able to kind of change the kind of public consensus. I mean, we cannot let these people run our country, was the way the Tory party put it. Who governs Britain? And during this oil crisis, a lot of developing countries had to run large debt, because except for some countries there were much fewer countries that are producing oil in those days than they are now. So most developing countries basically had to run debt because oil prices were 3 times, 4 times what they were before. And then this became a debt crisis. In 1982, Mexico defaulted, and then a series of countries that went into default, and then they had to go and beg money from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and then the rich countries which control these organizations saw their chance and said, okay, now you do it our way, so-called Washington Consensus. So yes, I mean, so this was the kind of power struggle, because basically, I mean, especially in the rich countries in Europe and North America, I mean, the workers that had the best time during that period. And I mean, the capitalists that didn't want to continue with that, so yeah, they hit back. United Nations, the bad Samaritans, well, I mean, the thing about the United Nations is that it has very little money. So it talks, but in a way, it doesn't count. But yeah, I mean, I worked with the World Bank before. Only a couple of weeks ago, I gave a talk at the International Monetary Fund, and the thing about these organizations is, first of all, you have to realize that they are highly politicized organizations. So what goes on at the top and what goes underneath are very different. So there are many economists in the World Bank, in the IMF, who agree with me, who want to invite me to give a talk and write a report for them. But when it comes to the top, it's basically the U.S. Treasury. I mean, miraculously, in the IMF and the World Bank, all the main decisions require 85% majority. And I'm sure it's a total accident, but the Americans own 80% of the share. So they have a veto power. So basically what the US Treasury decides is what the IMF and the World Bank as an organization do. So there are a lot of well-intentioned people really trying to help the developing countries in the way they think are right, but if what they want to do doesn't go with what goes at the top, then So yeah, I mean, I'm in kind of criticizing some of these international organizations, or even the national governments. I'm not saying that they're all kind of groups of evil people. It's much more complicated.
Yeah, over there.
I suppose I can see why a certain school of economics, like neoclassical economics, would be prevailing in governmental organisations in terms of vested interests and power. But I was wondering why you think academic economics still is dominated by a particular school of thought, and why more heterodox thinking is concentrated in smaller organisations that are quite diffuse.
Yeah.
One more question? Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting hearing you talk about the importance of kind of economic literacy. What do you think generally about the way that we teach economics at quite an introductory level in the UK? And how can you sort of balance teaching these basic principles but also not imposing kind of one narrative or one school of thought when you teach economics?
Yeah. Yeah, let's take one more.
I wanted to ask about the consequences of the current kind of US and China trend towards protectionism and their trade war and that.
Yeah, first of all, actually, people working in the real world, whether it's national government or the World Bank or the United Nations, or indeed corporations, they're actually more open-minded, because they need to get things done. And many of them do not mind whether the idea comes from, as far as that makes sense, as far as they find it useful. So actually, easiest that people to persuade are businessmen. Yeah? No, I mean, as far as that I mean, in my case, that I spent the first 5 minutes convincing them that I'm not a communist, how to destroy capitalism. You know, they don't care whether what I say comes from Marx or Keynes or Schumpeter, Hayek, you know. No, I mean, all they want is how do we make money, yeah? No, which is their job, you know, I have no problem with it, you know. I mean, only that you need to balance that with other social goals, and therefore the society, mainly, but not exclusively through government regulation, need to balance, yeah. Anyway, so that it's actually the academics who are more close-minded, yeah? Because for them, ideas are their identity. Yeah? Yeah, once again, totally understandable. Yeah? But you know that these people are there to talk about ideas. That's their job, but they should have the humility to admit that they don't have all the answers. Yeah? There are people who think in a different way. Yeah? And unfortunately, that is lacking. Yeah? I don't know. I mean, in all the academic discipline, you know, there are cliques and rivalries and so on. But yeah, I think economics is unique in its the homogenization. You know, I mean, to give you one shocking statistics, if you want to succeed in mainstream economics, you basically need to publish in the top 4 journals. Yeah? When I was a graduate student, they talked about top 10 journals. Not anymore. 4. Yeah? AER, QJA, Econometrica, and the JP. Yeah? And 2/3 of editors of those 4 journals are from 4 university departments. Well, I mean, they are PhD. Yeah? I mean, they might be teaching in other places, but their PhDs are from 4 university departments. Harvard, MIT, Chicago, Stanford. Not even Princeton, not even Yale, not even Berkeley. Huh? So, yeah, unfortunately, it's a very kind of closed shop kind of the profession. And also the thing is that economics has basically become the language of power. Huh? So there's so much stake in admitting that, well, I don't know everything. Yeah? Other people might have better ideas. Yeah? So unfortunately, that has become a very, very narrow-minded subject. Huh? Teaching of economics, yes, I think you know. First of all, we need to teach the people economics at many different levels. Yeah? So even at the kind of primary and secondary school levels, there's some teaching of economics. I mean, you know, the kids in, I mean, my kids have done it. I mean, do a geography project about certain country. Yeah? I mean, I think my daughter did it on St. Lucia. Yeah? So she got to learn about, you know, the sugar and slavery and yeah. So there's already some of it, but I think what makes the people kind of go off economics when it comes to kind of more serious teaching of economics is that we try to teach that first the principles and then try to apply them. Yeah? But I think that's the wrong way to teach. I mean, first you need to talk about problems. Yeah? So the cost of living crisis, yeah, or whatever. Yeah? And then ask people, so how can you understand this? Yeah? Maybe we need to learn this. Yeah? And then there are different theories. Yeah? There are different ways of dealing with this problem. Yeah? But because that we are teaching the principles first, we A, make it boring, and B, basically blind people to things that are not kind of close to these core principles. Yeah? So, I don't know, I mean, it's just one example, but you know, the last few months there have been all these reports about children starving in schools. Yeah? I mean, like coming to school with a slice of moldy bread, stealing their mate's food, I mean, in my view, that something like this should have been the headline every day, But no, I mean, people didn't even pay much attention because we have been taught in our economics that balancing the budget is the most important thing for the national economy. Economic growth is important. Business sentiment is important. I mean, these are all based on this certain theory. And this has basically made people forget that there are these other things. There should be, I mean, we are living in one of the richest societies ever created by humanity. And there are hundreds of thousands of children, at least, that are starving. Why is not the headline news? It's because we have been taught to think about the economy in a particular way. So I think that we really need to start from the problems, rather than, this individual, he maximizes, usually he. U.S.-China trade war, I mean, is in a way beyond standard economics, is it? Because in standard economics there's no politics. But this is a power struggle once again. Who's going to rule the world? I mean, China actually, in my view, at the moment, actually doesn't want to challenge the U.S. But the U.S. is anticipating the challenge. So they are saying, now we are going to make it impossible for these guys to compete with us militarily by restricting their access to chips. And we are going to put pressure on the Dutch and the Koreans and so on not to sell them high-grade chips. I don't know. My view is that this will only accelerate Chinese development of the chip technology. I think the Americans are making a big mistake. And also that you may be able to control one area like the military-grade microchips, but you cannot control the all areas that will make China stronger. Because Americans are, basically dependent on China to make everything. So I think it's that kind of very misguided attempt. But I mean, you cannot explain this purely in economic logic in the standard sense, although this should be part of economics. I mean, a lot of it is a power struggle.
One last round of questions.
Yeah, sure.
I don't come from economics as a discipline, so I'm thinking about a broader question about maybe academia as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, I think there's a sense in which in the developed world, that's probably not the right term these days. And in academia, it seems that our world's, the way we work is also infused with a certain orthodoxy and a certain ideology in terms of the kind of neoliberal productivity mindset. And it seems that increasingly producing work is about quantity over quality and is about different kinds of metrics, kind of these slightly, at times, opaque metrics of impact and even how much you're being shared on social media, whatever else it is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's a way out of this? Do you think it's a bad thing, as I'm sort of hinting? What's your kind of view? And do you view that as a kind of economic force in its own way, or is it something different?
Anyone? Yeah.
So first, great to have you back here in Cambridge. My question is really about how to engage. Do you have any advice on how to engage in a conversation with the mainstream colleagues at a economics faculty to encourage more pluralistic thinking, especially in teaching?
Yeah.
And then one last question, maybe?
Yeah.
I'd like to know how you would describe the interrelationship between neoliberalism and neoclassical economics.
Yeah. Okay. Good. let's start with the last one. Neoliberalism is a particular variety of neoclassical thinking. Yeah? So, I keep telling people neoclassical economics is not synonymous with neoliberalism. Yeah? I mean, neoliberalism is a particular interpretation of neoclassical economics and kind of infused with libertarian political ideology. Yeah? So, even Milton Friedman admits that the market value exists. Yeah? But he basically quickly dismisses it by saying it's not that important. Yeah? It's theoretically possible, but in reality, it's not that important. And then he and other the people would quickly add that also there's government failure. And that's even worse than market failure. So markets might fail, but usually it's better for the government not to do anything because they'll make things worse. Yeah? I mean, of course, these are not empirically proven propositions, but that you begin to look at the world with that view, and then you kind of only do research that will prove your case. Yeah? I mean, it's just not unique to neoliberals. I mean, everyone does that. Yeah? Let's face it. Yeah? No one goes in without any prior idea of anything, and then gets surprised by the results. Yeah? So neoclassical economics that can be very reformist. Yeah? I mean, I think Joe Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, I mean, you can justify a huge range of government intervention with neoclassical economics. Yeah? Indeed, in the 1930s, the Polish Marxist economist Oskar Lange basically built a neoclassical general equilibrium model to justify decentralized economic planning. Yeah? So, I mean, the limitation of neoclassical economics is only that its reforms are constrained by this idea of Pareto the optimality. Yeah? You cannot hurt anyone to change things. Yeah? So, but insofar as it doesn't cross that boundary, you can be very left-wing, reformist, whatever you may call it, with neoclassical economics. Yeah? So it's very important to distinguish these two, because my view is actually that quite a lot of neoclassical economies are not neoliberal. Yeah? But the political discourse that has been kind of dominated by more neoliberal of the neoclassical economies. Yeah? I mean, now it's less, but in the 80s and 90s, I mean, the so-called Chicago School of Economics was so dominant. Yeah? I mean, so you need to understand that. Yeah? Now, how do you have a dialogue with mainstream economists? Well, I mean, I'm very happy to talk to my mainstream colleagues about these things, and some of them have talked to me, and we learned from those. But unfortunately, many people don't even want to talk to someone like me. Huh? I mean, I used to joke that when I was literally the last non-neoclassical economist left in the Faculty of Economics until I left last year. I used to joke that I'm the mad uncle who lives in the attic. Occasionally comes down to mutter things to children. My undergraduate lectures, and then he disappears. I mean, frankly, some people, have called me charlatan. I mean, they have likened me to, I don't know, someone espousing the creationism within a biology department. Someone even called me a novelist. So how do you talk to people like that? So it is a matter of attitude. I mean, I'm not saying that all of them are like that, but my view is probably, 1/3 of them will talk to them, talk to people like me. 1/3 of them don't really care, yeah? And 1/3 of them are like that, yeah? I mean, these guys are not even economists, yeah, kind of, yeah? Yeah, and actually when the University of Manchester student first started this the economics curriculum reform movement which they called post-crash economics. I mean, on the kind of web page of that group, one of the professors kind of wrote this comment saying, "You guys say you want to learn Marxist economics. If you want to learn Marxist economics, go to North Korea." Yeah? I mean, North Korea, yeah, I mean, it's a feudal system, not the communism, yeah. But I mean, with that attitude like that, I mean, how do you even have a conversation? Yeah. So I'm afraid that it's that attitude has to change. But my view is that actually a lot of people will change their attitude when the overall political situation changes, which is why I actually try to work more with students and ordinary citizens rather than my academic colleagues. Because just think about it, in the 1970s, most economists were Keynesians. Yeah? I mean, even Richard Nixon said that we are all Keynesians now. Yeah? And come the 1980s, there were very few Keynesians left. Yeah? Where have they all gone? Yeah? No, it's not as if there was some death camp for Keynesian economists. Yeah? People just quietly changed their opinion. Yeah? So, maybe I mean, probably I'll die before it happens, but sometime in the future, the political atmosphere changes, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm an economic pluralist." I was never a neoliberal. Let's hope that happens. Yeah? Now, yeah, the academia as a kind of industry, I think it's basically I think we've taken things too far. Yeah? I mean, it is true that before, say, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, depending on the country, some professors were just time wasters. No research, come with the same lecture note from 25 years ago with rusting paper clips. Yeah, so you needed to do something, but now it has gone too far. I mean, now like in, I don't know, some war camp, you are basically given a target. 6 articles in the next 6 years, depending on the subject. 2 books in the next 6 years. Sometimes you have a lot of ideas. You can write 3 books in 6 years. Sometimes it takes 30 years. No, I mean well, I don't know whether he's Piero Sraffa. He basically wrote 1 article in Economic Journal in 1928. And 1 book, the famous the production of commodities by means of commodities in 1960, was it 61? Thereabout, He wrote 2 things whole life, But he's important enough to be there. I read somewhere that the average number of readership for an academic article in economics is 5. So it's you and 2 of your PhD students, 1 Japanese professor who works in your field, and maybe your dog. No one reads this stuff. And we keep citing the same articles. Because it's written by someone famous, it contains an important idea. You don't have time to read other things, So you keep citing Roma, you keep citing Acemoglu, So the citation for those people are this big, I mean, good articles, but do they deserve that many citations? No, because It's happening because of this the game that we have created. Yeah? So this idea of the kind of performance indicators and so on, yeah, all good, but some topics require very long, laborious research. Yeah? Maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. Yeah? Now we are making people write things that can be somehow finished in 6 months, 1 year. Yeah? You cannot do these long-term things. Yeah? So we are creating this academic short-termism. Yeah? So yeah, and all of this is basically combined with the marketization of higher education. Yeah? Because you need to be able to say that, oh, we are ranked the number 8 in the world in this field, and our student satisfaction ratio is the number 2 in the Guardian the index, and Okay, I mean, I'm not saying that these things that shouldn't be there. I mean, they are important, but now there's so much of the individuals' careers, funding of universities, yeah, reputations depend on these things. Yeah? As I mean, there are so many things that are supposed to have been said by Albert Einstein, but probably not. But apparently one of the things he said was not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that can be counted, everything counts can be counted. Yeah? So this the marketization, quantification is really the kind of making us do certain things better, but killing other things we need people who work on a single thing for 20 years, yeah? And produce that great piece of work. Yeah? It's not possible anymore. Yeah?
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Ha-Joon Chang, for joining us.
So I wish the best to CSF. I'm very proud that this is one society that has actually changed the curriculum, a bit. But I mean, all these other guys, I mean, they didn't introduce a single new course, yeah. I mean, they shouted until their throat bled, but Manchester, LSE, nothing, yeah. But at least CSEF has created this course in the history and philosophy of economics. So I am very proud of you guys. I thank you guys.